Okay, students, welcome to ME 6505 September 17 lecture. I know some of you wondering why is he repeating like this. That is for the recording. And when those want to replay my lecture, they need to know which day, which lecture is this about. So today we will be focusing on different types of biomaterials. And then what are their properties, functions, and possible applications, and why they are chosen for those applications. That's basically. Again, I'm not going to put a full screen mode because I have a voiceover. You see here, there's a voiceover. That means that my voice will come out, so it would disturb you in a slideshow. But I will run through the slides in this way. So in the first few lectures, we had a practitioner of biomedical device company. She talked about biomaterials, biomedical devices. Also, she gave a very long descriptive definition. So what she presented as a definition, they are most accurate as for the medical device regulatory authority. But for students like you, we just want to have a basic idea. What is biomaterial? I have simplified the definition. It is a material intended to interface with the biological systems to evaluate, treat, augment, or replace any tissue, organ, or function of the human body. So as long as that material is proposed to be used for these purposes with respect to the human health care, we consider that as a biomaterial. Yeah. So there may be people care for animals and so on. We don't consider that as a biomaterial from our definition. And we say biological system, that's because human body is essentially a biological system. We have more than few hundred billions of cells in our body. In the first lecture, we talked about what is the basic living unit of a human body, that is a cell. So when the cells are organized and you have different systems that are running our body, and when you put all those systems together, that's basically a human body. So we essentially look at human body as a biological system. And a material that is coming, interfacing, interacting with the biological system, we call it as a biomaterial. So then that's the broad definition. If you are a material scientist or a physicist or chemist, normally we look at materials in three broad categories. One is metals, second is polymers, third one is ceramics. These are basically three main categories of material systems in the world. There may be tens of thousands of materials, but they can be grouped into polymers, metals, and ceramics. They're primarily. And more recently, we combine polymers with other materials, in this case, say ceramic. We call that as a composite material. It is also possible you combine metal with a ceramic. You can call that also a composite. Or a ceramic with another ceramic is also a composite material. So these are basically four different major classes of biomaterials. So any textbook you look at it, any description, it would be related to these materials. And they are distinctly different, and they are applied for different purposes. I don't want to ask you a question, but generally polymers are more softer, flexible compared to metals and ceramics. That's why you find polymers most commonly explored for soft tissues in our body. Skin is a soft tissue. So beneath the skin, you have bone that is giving you the physical structure, and you find a more stronger, stiffer materials like metals and ceramics they use for treating bone-related defects. So in a way, based on the general physical, mechanical properties of the materials, you would actually see where they're being used. So you see the metals, there is an example there that could be made of stainless steel or titanium 6 aluminum 4 vanadium, Ti6Al4V. It's kind of material. So they use for the bone screws. I don't know whether most of you are in a 20 plus, whether you ever had a bone fracture. If you had a bone fracture, most likely, if it is a serious fracture, they would have implanted a bone screw to bring those fractured bone pieces together. And so they put a bone screw. The other one, if the damage is in multiple locations and it cannot be treated with a single screw, then you have a bone plate, a plate like that. It's a metallic plate. It could be stainless steel. It has holes. It depends how many holes, how long is the plate you need it. And they fix the plate in position using the screws. Very similar to the way we do mechanical engineering or civil engineering. In this case, the only application is the bone, which happens to be the human organ. So similarly, some examples, polymers, you also find them in a ventilator, intravenous tubes. These are simple examples. So intravenous tube for injecting drugs or some other biological or biofluids into the human body. Sometimes people, especially when they have a lower energy, their glucose levels or iron levels are down to a certain threshold. They're in a dangerous condition. Their health is in a serious condition. So that's where they do the IV tubes and they do the emergency procedures. So it's very common. And those are made of primarily polymer materials. Then you have this example of dental crown. Many of you, I'm sure, went through this. So the cavities in our teeth are often filled with this kind of ceramic materials, or a combination of ceramic and polymer. So you could see a composite here. It's the composite here. There's a silver as well as a gold. So different people choose different material for filling the cavities. But if you had to replace the complete teeth because it's damaged or the root is fully decayed, then you are replacing the complete teeth or the surface of the teeth. So depending on that, they use crowns for the surface. Sometimes they have a metallic inside. On top of that, they have a crown. So it depends on the design, depends on your choice you make when you go to the dentist. Yeah. So there's no single one solution. There are multiple ways you treat the decayed tooth. It depends on what the dentist want to do. Okay. So if you want to avoid going to the dentist, what should you do? Exactly. You eat very carefully. You brush properly 3 times a day. Most important is before you sleep. And you do the flossing, dental floss. So make sure between the teeth, there's nothing left inside there. Even though I smile, it's very serious. If you guys don't take care of your teeth, it's a matter of time they will decay. Flossing is very, very important. And brushing properly is also very important. Otherwise, you are damaging the enamel, right? So I still remember when I visited the dentist a few years ago, he looked at me and said, "You're not flossing properly. That's why you're coming to me. Just buy the toothpick, make sure every day you clean it properly. And I have been doing it. The last time I visited dentist 10 years ago. 10 years ago. It's amazing. His normal neighborhood dentist, he just said to me, of course, I'm a professor. So he said, you don't need to come here. All you need to do is just have a good practice. Then I said, well, you made me a suggestion. You have a less business now because I'm not going to him, right? It's okay, but he's quite a nice guy. It's true. Last 10 years, I did not go to the dentist. I don't need to go to the dentist. So very simple things, but very practical. So people always say, I'm lazy, I don't want to brush this and all. I told you this class is about more how it is useful for your healthcare outcomes, and also how you look at your family members and advise them. If you have to tell them, very simple. Brush the teeth. Make sure nothing left between the teeth before you sleep. The reason is any food particles, when they're getting digested by the enzymes in our mouth, they change the pH value in our mouth. It can be acidic or basic. And because of the change in the pH value, even though your enamel is very strong, but it gets decayed. As simple as that. So even if you're lazy, just take 3 minutes and you can do that. So that's my whole point of this lecture is you can have less of these biomaterials and devices if you can understand how to learn some important things from this lecture. Yeah? Okay. So now from here we go deeper. Okay, now we're going to focus on one group of material, polymer biomaterials. So if you see there is a reading material, chapter 5, polymer biomaterials. This is from my book. So you have the book in Canvas, and a book chapter is made available to you. So if you're interested, you can read that maybe 10 or 20 pages of written, printed material about that one. That's quite detailed. But if you just want to have a basic idea, what is a polymer biomaterials, I will talk to you about it now. Okay, so let's look at most from the application point of view. Then we go into the polymer chemistry, microstructure, macromolecular structures that are there in the polymer biomaterials. So these are a few simple or straightforward examples of polymer biomaterials. So if you notice heart walls, can you spot which one is biomaterial, which one is polymer biomaterial on the top left hand? So if you look at it, this is actually a heart wall, and this is probably made of a ceramic like carbon. But the outer, the cloth that is actually surrounding the wall, that is used for placing the heart wall and stitching it onto the blood vessels or arteries. And this particular sleeve is actually made of polymer. Yeah. Whereas this one is a ceramic. So when you look at a biomedical device, sometimes you find a combination of materials. So in this case, this is a heart wall, but it is a biological heart wall. So the yellow one is actually taken from a pig, or what we call porcine. So we extract the heart wall of a pig because the anatomy of a porcine is very similar to the human heart wall. So we harvest that and then we stitch that in the place of where heart valve is damaged in a human being. So when you go to the doctor, hopefully you don't need to go to the doctor. If you go to the doctor, he will actually ask you, do you want this one or do you want that one? And that's where your biomaterial knowledge comes into the picture. So once you start reading, you'll understand a little bit detail. What happens is if it's a biological one, the way it interacts with the blood is different from the mechanical one. There are a lot of proteins in your blood, and they come and adhere onto any foreign surface. I remember I explained to you last time, foreign body reaction and those initial inflammatory reactions. Those are a function of the chemical nature of the biomedical device. So in this case, you have a biological material, it's different. If it is a ceramic, it's different. And that's why the interactions are different, and they have a different influence, the way on their functionality, as well as how good is this particular wall. Most of the time, people choose based on the cost because, hey, I can't afford this unless you have an insurance. So after that, there's another thing you need to look at is if you take this kind of wall, they say you have to take certain medicines. You take that wall, you don't need to take the medicines. But this is more long lasting. This doesn't last that long. So there's a lot of such things you need to compare. So as a biomaterial scientist, once you have this basic idea, you can search and find out and then decide much more appropriate one. It's always a challenge for patients. They don't know how to select. But the doctor will say, you select. Yeah, this is how it works. So then you have a stents. These are the stents basically. Most of the time, our lives are happy. And when we are happy, we eat all kinds of food, especially which is high calorie food. That high calorie food leads to formation of, clogs, plaque. It's basically deposits on your interior of the blood vessel. And then the blood vessels become narrow and narrow. And that means blood is not flowing through. And people will have a heart attack. And that's why very fast you had to go to the clinic because the doctor need to look into the problem and fix it. Otherwise, the blood supply is not there and the person can be fatal. If that happens in the brain, we call it as a stroke. If it happens the rest of the body, we call it as a heart attack. Fundamentally, the process is same, but the location is different. In either case, both are very dangerous. So that's why advice is you have any symptoms, go quickly. So what's the symptom of heart attack? They will have intense pain in the chest. And where is the heart? It's on the left side. Yeah. So when somebody has a serious condition, they're struggling to breathe, they have intense pain, then this guy is having this problem. Similarly, the stroke patient, sometimes they have a blur vision and so on. So they struggle, they can't concentrate. And sometimes they get the early indication. And when somebody says that, take them a little bit seriously and take them to the hospital. Otherwise, the stroke will lead to paralysis and other issues. Somebody loses the vision as well. So there's a lot of complication. But ultimately, when you take the patient there, what they do, one procedure is the stenting. So they basically put a metallic or a polymer stent and then open up the constricted arteries. Yeah. Okay. So I can go on explaining all these devices. I think we would need about 1,000 hours because there's so much to explain and the design of each of them, why we design that way, what kind of analysis that goes on. So if you are doing a PhD, you would know how much work that goes into it. But this is a class meant for all disciplines of engineering. So we're not going to go into the detail. Otherwise, it would be boring for many others. Okay. So similarly, polymers are also used in sutures, clips, as well as adhesives. So for example, there is a surgery. After the surgery, you have to close the wound and you need some kind of strings or a thread. So in this case, they are made of basically polymers. And those polymers may be derived from other animals or is actually produced from petrochemicals. So it depends where the source of the polymer. And the wound dressing, The tubing I explained, like ventilator tubing, IV tubing, and also you have a diagnostic devices, in this case, blood test for diabetes, or many other testing devices. They also use a lot of polymers. And also drugs, the medicines. When you take a medicine, in that medicine, the tablet, either it is a solid or liquid, the active ingredient is actually very small, the real medicine, what we call API. But other than that, you have many other things you mix because you need to deliver the drug properly. You need to protect the drug properly. So to protect the drug from your own body, you actually add at least 20 different things. That's a formulation. So after 2 weeks, we will describe in detail about drug delivery systems and the cutting edge advances in drug delivery. It's a very important field. So you will have a very detailed lecture on that in the future. And of course, a new area which is emerging called tissue engineering. What it means is you are engineering the tissues. For example, I have a skin, and some reason he didn't like me, and then he poured a lot of hot water on me. My whole skin is gone. Skin by itself can generate, but only a small extent. Suppose I have a cut, it will heal it by itself if I'm healthy. But imagine he removed my whole forearm skin. It will not regenerate by itself. So there's a limitation. And in the past, they were doing grafting. That means they take the skin from the skull of the patient, little by little, they actually graft where it is needed, and then eventually that heals. So the new procedure they're trying to do is they use this kind of 3D printing or other technology where they take polymer, and there are holes or structures which are filled with the skin cells. And then afterwards, certain bioreactor conditions, we regenerate the skin. And that skin is grafted on the surface where it is needed. So next time, if you ever visit skin clinics, I have visited, it's really, oh wow, you cannot imagine. Can you imagine a human body with no skin at all? It's unbelievable. I've seen that because when people get older, they lose the sense of their own skin. So they go to the hot water bath, they just sit there, and the whole skin is peeled off. Yeah, I've seen those patients. It's you really can't even open your eyes. It's that so tough to watch. But these are real cases. I'm not joking. When you get to the actual that kind of clinics, you actually see how much is the trauma. So that means regenerative skin of the whole body cannot be done by itself. That's why we have this new technology called tissue engineering or regenerative medicine. I don't know anybody doing PhD in tissue engineering, regenerative medicine. Okay, maybe nobody, but we have a lot of research programs in NUS. I've done several programs related to the heart, regeneration of the heart. We also looked at regeneration of the neurons or brain tissues and so on, but that is in the past. So it's a very interesting area, cutting edge research is going on. So every case, you need a polymer. That's the point. So now we go a little bit deeper. It gets more and more scientific. What you see here, polymers, there's a list here, second column. And third one is on applications. But if you look at this side, these polymers can be grouped as a non-biodegradable polymers and a biodegradable polymers. So what does that mean is a non-biodegradable polymer is a stable polymer. So when you put that in touch with a biological system, that polymer is stable. Whereas the other polymer, when it is in touch with the biological system, it is designed to disintegrate and disappear completely. That's a biodegradable polymer. And the examples are here: polyglycolic acid, polylactic acid, polycaprolactone, and the combinations collagen, gelatin, chitosan. These are most commonly used biodegradable polymers. So question is, this polymer right now outside is stable. When you put inside the body or in touch with the biological system, why are they getting affected? Because our biological system is quite aggressive. You may not look aggressive, but your body is very aggressive. It is trying to protect you. So the biological system, if you start looking at different parts of your body, some places very acidic and some places highly basic. So the pH is not neutral. So when a pH is not neutral and then you have biological fluids and cells that are in touch with these biomaterial, they will start destroying the material. Whereas the non-biodegradable material is stable, it is designed to be stable so that it remains stable. Whereas the non-biodegradable material that remains stable. Whereas the biodegradable material that gets degraded with time. There are many, many mechanisms of degradation. So some go from the degradation on the surface to the inside. Some they degrade very fast and completely from inside to outside. So there are different mechanisms we propose, and that depends on the design we have in terms of the application. So again, each one is a very deep area. So important thing for you is to know there are two types, and these are typical examples, and these are basically what kind of applications where that degradability or non-degradability of polymer is exploited. So now we go further deeper. So we talked about broadly the names, but what exactly a polymer? So polymers, all of them starts with the monomers. Monomers are nothing but chemical molecules. They are made of carbon, hydrogen, in some cases nitrogen. So based on this carbon, hydrogen, and nitrogen combination, and sometimes other like chlorine or fluorine, so different elements are there. Most of them are organic because there is a carbon there. So because of these chemicals, and if you can organize them as a strings, we call them polymer. Monomer, put them together, that becomes polymer. So now this polymer, you can imagine variety of molecular structures. Yeah. So these are schematic illustrations of those C and H, maybe other substitute elements like nitrogen, chlorine, fluorine. So these can be organized now as a branched polymer, cross-linked polymer, or a network polymer. It's primarily organization of the molecules. So if you have a chemistry background, organic chemistry background, you would have a basic idea. If you don't have that background, all you need to imagine is, many of you has seen the necklaces or beads. Those are, imagine each one is a myrrh, and they're actually somehow put together, and that becomes a polymer. And then polymer has a different organization, and that's why we call them branched polymer, cross-linked polymer, and network polymer. So the chemical engineers, our chemists, biochemists are busy in designing these different polymers and then processing and manufacturing them. So each one is complicated based on this macromolecular structure. So the more complex it is, more difficult for you to process, more difficult for you to manufacture in a large quantities with a consistent quality. So that's the challenge. And if it is not a consistent quality, the problem is that biomaterial will not be certified for use. So it has to be very consistent quality. So that's where the challenge of a polymer comes. So now we go further imagination, where imagine you have two different polymers, maybe three different polymers. How can you imagine them together? Here you have a random copolymer, a blocks copolymer, alternating copolymer, gradient copolymer, periodic copolymer, a graft copolymer. So now you can imagine why so many chemists are busy. Why do they do that? That's because one polymer will have certain properties. So if you bring another polymer together, you are leveraging both the properties. So, and the way you arrange the sequence, you are exploiting the good aspects of each of those polymers. That's why we have these copolymers or blended polymers. So many of them. In fact, most polymers are like that. And organic chemistry is quite challenging, like mathematics. Once you go into the detail, it's very challenging for us. But the basic understanding is this. You are basically mixing different polymer molecules to get a desired physical, mechanical, chemical, biological, electrical properties. Whatever property you want, you would basically imagine how to bring different kind of polymers together and make them. So that's basically chemical engineering and chemistry. So then the biomaterial researchers use them and then further modify them for a specific application. Yeah? Okay. So now we go into the, actually, when you want to buy a polymer, or when you want to, source for the polymer, you have to specify this information. So there are two important terminology, molecular weight, Mn, and Mw, molecular weight. So these are basically to look at or describe how long is the polymer molecule and how many such length of the molecules distributed in a polymer material. So if you, for example, you buy 1 gram of polymer, it has, let's say, 1 million molecules. Not all million molecules have the same size. They come in different sizes. Like all of you, you're all human beings. If I ask you your height, it would not be the same. You may be taller than me, shorter than me, whatever. So that's basically the length of the polymer molecule is different. And the distribution of the length of the polymer molecules, we call it as a polydispersity index. Polydispersity index. If the polydispersity index is very narrow, that means the polymer molecules have a very narrow range. If the index is very wide, that means we have very small, we have very large, different kinds of polymer molecules there. So what that means is the mechanical behavior, physical properties of the polymer depends on the polydispersity index, which is defined in this way. So basically, when you get into the chemistry, you'll start talking about polydispersity index. And if it's too large, that means that polymer properties can vary broadly. But if it is narrow, the properties are very precise, well-defined, and reproducible much better way. So that's how, as you start doing research or finding better materials, you start actually asking for that kind of information in a biomaterials field. Okay. Okay. Now, to make things even more complicated, okay, I have 2 different polymers, 3 different polymer molecules, and they are copolymer, cross-linked polymer, whatever. But then there is another consideration. These polymer molecules, are they highly random? Are they very nicely organized. If they're random, we call them amorphous polymers. If they're highly organized, we call them crystallized polymers. So I'm sure you have seen polymer display screens. In those, they actually have polymers highly organized. Whereas same display, polymer display, if it is randomly organized, it won't work. So that is basically making sure you want to get a better, consistent, high quality properties, you would go more and more crystalline, but amorphous is more general. So how do you know a polymer is crystalline or amorphous or a combination? So you look at what we call, you heat the polymer, and when you heat it, the melting temperature, Tm, and in the case of crystalline, there is a sudden jump and you are heating. Whereas in a amorphous polymer, it is a gradual move when you are actually increasing temperature. And what we call the transition, we call a glass transition temperature. So basically from glassy phase, it becomes a liquid phase. So based on the thermal behavior of the polymer, we have an idea whether it has a crystalline molecular chains or is completely amorphous or it is in between. So thermal behavior, what they call dynamic thermal analysis, using that, they will actually ascertain that. So now, why that information is important is, this is the reason. So in a typical polymer, if you have higher crystallinity, the material will behave in a brittle way. That means it fails at a higher stress, but the failure strain is low. Whereas if the material is highly amorphous, you have elongated behavior. That means the failure strain is large, but the strength is low. Failure stress is low. So the crystallinity enables you to increase the strength of the material, make it more stiffer. You can also see the slope is the stiffness, and this is slope is in this way, this one slope is in that way. That means that the higher stiffness. So in general, you increase the crystallinity, stiffness, and strength of the polymer increases while failure strain decreases. That's because you have made it more crystalline. Yeah. So a typical polymer generally would have crystalline regions and amorphous regions as a combination. It's based on how you process the polymer, all your process engineering, like injection molding, extrusion, thermal forming. There are at least 20 different ways you can process the polymer. The way you process, how you actually control the processing conditions, you can change from amorphous to more crystalline or ordered molecular structure. So again, processing comes into the picture. And that's where you do your advanced thermal analysis, fluid dynamics, or if you want, you can do molecular dynamics modeling to do that. And then people start predicting the properties based on from microstructure to the property prediction. So you can go the other way. So as I explained, the polymers, based on their stress strain behavior, you can say they're brittle, they're plastic, or they're elastomeric. So you look at the stress and strain behavior, it's different. So again, even though we say polymer, they have 3 different types of behavior. You have brittle polymers or plastics, and you have highly elastomeric plastics. So depending on the application, you would have to choose which kind of polymer is more suited. Okay. Now, this is a graduate class, so he wants more complexity. So we have to add more complexity. So now you can see we can make things more and more complicated, literally. And let me see what we have. So based on the backbone structure, you have a different polymer classification. Based on the origin, are they polymers derived from the natural biomass? We call them natural polymers, like chitosan, agarose, dextrol, gelatin, albumin, collagen, and hyaluronic acid. Yeah. Whereas if it is completely derived from petrochemicals or other synthetic waste, these are the different materials. Again, they are degradable and non-biodegradable. And again, you can further classify them as silicones and so on, many. So polymers are many types. It's a huge industry. In the human body, the most widely commonly used polymer material is the biomaterial. So most widely used biomaterial is polymer, but there are many, many types of polymers. And that's just at this level. We can go down even deeper, further classifying them. So that you really need a huge description. So there are actually dedicated textbooks on biomedical polymers. There's a lot of things. So I think I don't want to go deeper and deeper, and then eventually nothing retains in your mind. So I had to make sure we don't go too much deeper. Yeah. But if you are interested, you can pick one of that and keep going inside for the detail. So in summary, basically, polymers have a kind of unique opportunity for you to tailor their physical, mechanical, biological properties by playing with their macromolecular structure, their chemistry and organization of the chains, and also the crystallinity and amorphous regions of the polymer. So these are the variety. And then on top of that, you have additional functionalities. They are designed to be very stable, non-biodegradable. They are designed to degrade in the human body conditions. So depending on the application, depending on your device design, you choose a different way biomaterial. So that's basically a short, brief summary of biomedical polymers. Okay. So now we go to the next one. Ceramics is a chapter 6. It's in my book, and a copy is made available to you. You can read that. So ceramics are actually ceramics, but if you use for biomedical applications, we call them bioceramics. These are ceramics used for biomedical applications. That's why we call them bioceramics. So now, what is the difference between a polymer and a ceramic? So here is it. Ceramics are inorganic solid state materials comprised of metallic and non-metallic elements bound together by ionic bonds. Ionic bonds. So here is the thing. Ionic bonds, the electrons, see, every material, what is the fundamental unit of a material? At the microscopic level, when you see inside the material, what do you find? Atoms, basically. So atom is the smallest unit. Of course, you can go inside the atom, you can find electrons, neutrons, and protons. You can go further. You can go almost another 1,000,000 times inside, and you can find bosons and I don't know, even God particles probably. So, but that's, but fundamentally a unit is atom. So an atom has a center nucleus, and you have electrons rotating around them. So that's basically fundamental physics. So there's those electrons, which every atom will have, if they are shared between two atoms in a way, that means electron is transferred from one to the another atom, they form ionic bond. The best example is sodium chloride, the salt. Sodium and chlorine, Na and Cl. So electron from sodium is transferred to the chlorine, and they form an ionic bond. That's why you have the salt. So that's a basic thing. And an example is a dental crown, which is a ceramic made of alumina, Al2O3. So now, in the case of polymers, the electron is actually not transferred. completely to the other atom. Two atoms say, let us share it. That's called covalent bond. So when the electrons are shared by two atoms, they form covalent bonds. When an electron is actually moved from one atom to the another atom, they form ionic bond. Now, ionic bonds are much stronger because there's a lot more energy involved in transferring the electron. So between the two atoms, the bond, the force that is required to separate those two atoms after the ionic bond is formed is very, very high. That's why they're very brittle. So if you try to separate them, they will not, they resist a lot. Eventually they break apart, and that's basically a brittle behavior. Whereas in this case, because they're sharing, they're more stretchy. So covalent bonds are more stretchy. So you do not have highly brittle behavior with the covalent bonds. Normally ionic bonds have a brittle behavior, and that's normally associated with the polymers, sorry, associated with the ceramics. Whereas this one, covalent bonds are associated with the polymers. Okay. So now you look at the mechanical properties of ceramics. So these are standard bioceramics: alumina, zirconia, silicon carbide, silicon nitride, hydroxyapatite. And now you look at the density, they're generally more dense than a polymer. And look at the Young's modulus, gigapascals, very, very, very stiff. So you have an alumina, which is 440 gigapascals. Silicon nitride is 300 gigapascals. Hydroxyapatite is only 7 gigapascals, 10 gigapascals. What is hydroxyapatite? In your body, the largest number of heavy weight is the bones. So inside the bone, if you see it, it has a polymer, it has a ceramic. Polymer is collagen, ceramics is hydroxyapatite. So you have a polymer chain on which this hydroxyapatite is nicely sitting, and that's why you have the bone. And that's why your bone has certain toughness because of this combination. You have a polymer, which is collagen, which is soft, and you have a hard part, which is hydroxyapatite. A combination of them in a hierarchical arrangement, you get that complex bone behavior. So the hydroxyapatite is stiff, but not as stiff as engineering ceramics like alumina, zirconia, or silicon nitride. And now you look at the fracture toughness, compressive strength, and tensile strength. Compared to tensile strength, compressive strength is much higher because these are ceramics, ionic bonds. Ceramics with the ionic bonds, they're very good in compression. They're very weak in tension. So in a compression, they resist a lot. That's why you have a very high compressive strength. So for example, you use ceramics in dental. That's because when you are eating, you're applying a lot of compressive forces. So the ceramic in your teeth can withstand that kind of compressive forces. That's the idea. Okay. So now these ceramic, bioceramic, has one more differentiator. One is bioinert, other one is bioactive, other one is bioresorbable. So bioinert means these particular ceramics, when they're in touch with the biological system, they're very stable. Whereas bioactive, these are relatively new. Larry Hench from Imperial College, he came up with this one about 40 years ago. They are bioactive. That means they are reacting with the host biological system. And then bioresorbable means after some time, like the degradable polymers, these particular bioresorbable ceramics, they degrade and they disappear from our body. So again, depending on the application, we choose a different type of bioceramic. Either it is inert, either it is bioactive, or bioresorbable. So as you can see, based on the broad classification of biomaterial, each has a different unique properties and behavior. Okay. So here it is, the definition. Bioinert ceramics do not instigate, response, or interact with the body's environment, possess high chemical stability with the surrounding tissue. When it comes to bioresorbable, they gradually, steadily resorb in the body after a specified period when interacted with the host tissue, biological tissue, and it is degraded or solubilized or phagocytosed by the body and substituted by the host tissue over time. So what is it? There are lots of terms there. Solubilize, it is dissolved. The phagocytose means the cells in our body trying to digest them. That is a phagocytosis. The cell in your body try to attack the biomaterial. If it is small enough, it want to eat them. You basically engulf it. It's called phagocytosis. So it's a biological term. They normally explain in terms of how a cell is interacting with a foreign material. In this case, is biomaterial, phagocytosis. So then the other one is bioactive ceramics provide a favorable reaction within the biological system at the interface between the host tissue and the biomaterial, which is ceramic. It gives rise to direct bonding with the living host tissue, for example, bone, and upon implantation, and that will provide a better integration of the implant with the host tissue. So the bioactive ceramics, bioactive glass, that's why they have been promoted, because they have a better integration with the host tissue. It depends how the implant is designed and what kind of strategy they're using. Yeah. So previous one, I have given the examples of them. This one is the definition. So now, where are they used? So here is an example. Okay, all of us, if you remove the skin and everything else, that's basically how we look like. The reality. Outside we may look very beautiful, handsome, but ultimately inside the body is all about the structure. That's it. So now a simple hip joint is so complicated. It's not at all simple. So I have no idea why our human bodies are so complex. You know, as a mechanical engineer, I look at it, all I'm doing is just sitting, standing, moving, running, that's all. And why it should be so complicated? I don't know. I don't have an answer. But I always think why our human body, our biological systems are so complex. They could be much more simpler, but well, they're very complicated. I don't have that answer, but when you guys find that answer, you let me know. But fundamentally, it's very complicated. Look at this, a hip joint. You have a acetabulum, you have a femoral head, which is basically this is the femur bone, and it has basically a long bone, and there is a head there, and this head is in a socket, and then there is acetabulum, the whole thing. And then you have muscles connected to them. There is a other connective tissue holding them in place. There's a whole lot of stuff there. Very complicated. So a typical hip joint, for example, so this is what actually they do. When people get older, they have a serious accident and the hip joint is completely broken. So to fix it, they will basically do this kind of implant. It's called total hip replacement. Total hip replacement. So again, you have this what we call femoral component, this one. That's normally made of titanium alloy, Ti6Al4V. Sometimes maybe stainless steel, but most commonly it's titanium 6Al4V. And then on top of that, you have a head, femoral head. And then you house that femoral head in a socket. And you house that socket into another one, acetabulum. So this is basically shell, lining, head, and the stem. So this is a complicated structure. In this total hip replacement started in World War II. In World War II, a lot of soldiers getting affected. So doctors don't know how to fix it. So they figured out whatever the way they can fix it, they fixed it. So basically they cut open, they find some kind of metal, fix it, and make sure that the guy can get up and walk, and he has problems, okay, fix again. So this is what they did. And now, of course, it's much more sophisticated. But in World War II time, that's a story. Anyway, when I studied like you guys, this is what the story my professor told me. That time, there's no regulations, nothing. Okay, there's a patient, a soldier struggling, bleeding, fix the problem. So see, whatever you can find, fix it fast. But now we can't do that. Now there's a lot of medical regulations. But the benefit of that is all those people being tried and tested, and now the implants design became much more nicer and more functional. But it's not that simple. So if you look at it, it's like shopping for a product, whatever gadget you want. You want to buy some product, there are too many varieties there, too many options. So right now, same situation. In a hip replacement, first the doctor has to decide, does he want to replace the total hip or a partial hip? That means he may just want to put the stem. He doesn't want to put the rest of them, depending on the situation. Or he say, I had to replace the whole thing. So that means you have a complete total hip replacement. So that's a decision patient and the doctor have to make. Because they'll do the X-ray, they show you the image, and they'll say, this is good for you, then you decide. Yeah, this is how it goes. So a knowledge of this particular course is helpful to you. Otherwise, it'll be so scary. All this information is like a Greek and Latin. Right? So now you see femoral component, socket, different combination. What do they call MOM? Metal on metal, metal on plastic, ceramic on plastic, ceramic on ceramic. It's the joint combination, whether it is made of metal, polymer, ceramic, whatever combination. So that basically differentiates. You remember I described 3 important materials, classes: polymers, metals, and ceramics. Polymers are softer, metals are in between, ceramics are very brittle and hard. So now, if you put a metal on metal, they said these things are actually loosening faster and also gives a lot of pain to the patients, because this metal on metal somehow wears, and the wear particles comes out and gives the pain to the patient. So that design is not working. Even though all our mechanical design, we use a lot of metal on metal, but that doesn't work here. Similarly, metal on plastic, extensively in use and low wear. And then you have ceramic on polymer, and then ceramic and ceramic. It has a minimum wear rate, but there is a pain to the patient because, again, the ceramic on ceramic releases the fine particles, apparently quite painful to the patient. So they have been mostly out of the market. And then you have a metal on polymer, and then surface coated metals. So if you are studying total hip replacement, mindful, there are many, many options. It's not one. So again, those how the polymer is processed, they have a different molecular weight polymers, low molecular weight, medium and high density, ultra high molecular density polymers. Similarly, ceramics is aluminum, zirconia, or a combination, they have different properties. So different designs, different companies, different hip joints. So you are deciding for your grandmother, you need to know. Okay, so it gets so complicated. Then now we move to the metals. These are bioceramic applications. Now we go to metals. Chapter 7, I have given a copy. So now if you look at metals, wherever there is a bone, mostly they use metals. So now you can see this is a bone, you have artificial finger joints, shoulder joints, spinal, knee joints, ankle joints, and so on. Basically, all the joints in our body, somehow they use metallic implants, many of them. And then, of course, there's also, this is my first project at National University of Singapore. That was like long time ago. I was surprised. That's the first time I'm trying to understand. It's called external fixator called Lazarov fixator. I was told people, when they're born, one leg is shorter than the other leg, or one leg is longer than the other leg. And they're concerned about it. So they want that shorter bone to be elongated. So what the doctor do is they fix this kind of thing. It's a metal frame with screws. And then they gradually adjust the distance so that the bone becomes longer. That was my first project here with NUH long time ago. Yeah, I didn't know that kind of things are done, but amazing what people want. Of course, there are other medical reasons why they do that. Okay. Okay, so this is a total knee replacement. I'm sorry to show you all these little bit blood involved pictures, but that's what it is. So let's say this is a knee joint, and it's very complicated, like a hip joint. You see here. So when someone has arthritis and it's very difficult to manage, or other problems with the knee, typical procedure is they use this kind of saw, they shave off the joint part, basically. The doctor will decide how much to cut. Then based on that, the implant thickness, positioning, how he want to use, what kind of adhesive, what kind of screws he want to put, mostly adhesive in this case, and they have to put it in place and then get you walk. So this is how it look like. And then again, design is complicated. You have a femur, which is the thigh bone, and that's the tibia, which is the leg bone. So this is a joint, it is formed, and then you have muscles, and then this femoral component, what we call generally made of metal, and then you have a tibial component, which is basically a polymer. So a metal on a polymer surface is basically a way of recreating your knee joint. Again, they have partial knee joints, full knee joints. So sometimes they only choose to do a section of it, or only one part of that, other one leave it as your natural one. So my suggestion is, if you don't need it, don't do it, because these are all artificial. Never, never match the natural bones, natural tissues. So if you can bear with a little pain, stay that way. But you can't, and you want some fixation, well, go for it. But I have a last slide that talks about the pain. And this pain is real, pain is imaginary. It's as real, but it's also imaginary, our pain. So I will explain that on the last slide as a kind of closing. But fundamentally, metals are also used in knee implants, and in this case would be titanium 6Al4V or a stainless steel metal. So now we are basically looking at these common metallic biomaterials: stainless steel, chromium cobalt alloy, titanium, which is pure titanium, titanium alloy, titanium 6 aluminum, 4 vanadium, magnesium, and a cortical bone. We are comparing a cortical bone. It's a natural one. So if you look at the Young's modulus, or stiffness is much higher, yield strength is higher, tensile strength is higher, fatigue limit is higher. So here, this is our bone, strength and a modulus at a lower level, and you have a cancellous bone and cortical bone. There are two types. What is the difference? Cortical bone is a hard bone, the surface. Cancellous bone is the inside bone. So if I take my bone in my hand, on the surface of that bone is a cortical. Inside is a cancellous bone. And then cortical and cancellous bone has a directional properties. It's not the same property in all directions. It has a directional property. So compared to that, cancellous bone or cortical bone, you look at any metal, is much higher in terms of the modulus and strength. Similarly, ceramics will also fall in this range, whereas the polymers would be somewhere here. Polymers will be much lower, whereas ceramics and metals are in this top right-hand corner. So when you want an optimum biomaterial, there is no such thing called optimal biomaterial because there is a mismatch. So now, to understand this mismatch, there is something called stress shielding concept. So to understand this concept, just imagine, I don't know whether you have anybody gone to space in your family? So if you do family, space travel, and you leave them for a year and they come back, their bone density will be lower. I have a guest here today. He does paragliding and shooting. Well, I think next step is go to space. Yeah, yeah. So he does. What do you call that? Skydiving. So he jumps from the planes. I saw his photos, and but that's fine from the planes. But you are in the space. You're left there for a year or so. Your bone will become weaker. Why? That's right. The gravity in space and gravity on planet Earth is different. It's much higher on Earth. Gravity is nothing but a force. Force experienced by the bone. If the bone experiences the right amount of force or the load, it is healthy. If it doesn't, it becomes weaker. It becomes porous. Same way, patients, they are on the bed for a long time, their bones become weaker because they're not moving. And since they're not doing physical exercise, bone is not experiencing the natural forces, adequate amount of force. And if there's not enough force, bone remodels and it becomes weaker. So don't hope to be not active. It's okay to be active because the more active you are taking care of your bone, you're taking care of your joints and your muscles and everything. So hoping not to do anything is not a good idea. Anyway, that's your whatever interest. So to explain the stress shielding effect, you look at a healthy femur bone. When you stand, basically the force from the upper body transmitted through the femur and it goes to the femur bone. So now if I put an implant, what happens is that stress is actually taken up by the implant and the bone is not experiencing sufficient amount of load. And so if the biomaterial is so stiff, it is taking all the load, the surrounding bone is not experiencing the force, and that becomes weaker. We call that stress shielding effect, or Wolff's law. So the trick in designing implants, especially load-bearing implants, you design such a way the surrounding tissues experience optimum level of force or stress. If they don't, they become weaker. So that's the idea. Why an understanding of Wolff's law or stress shielding law helps you to look at the mechanical properties of the material you selected, the implant design, so that it would not give unnecessarily the stress shielding effect to the host tissue. So that's the principle behind this one. So then you have shape memory materials. They're used, dental area as well as stents, I explained. And then this is the these are orthodontic wires. And you see, I'm sure at least 30% of you went for your teeth alignment, right? It's very common among the teenagers, young adults. So below one is actually made of metal. On the top one, it's a composite material, polymer and a ceramic. So in Singapore, first such nice looking orthodontic wires were invented by us. So my PhD student many years ago, 5 of them. So they actually came up with this composite wires, orthodontic wires. They set up a company, and later on it was bought over by another company. So their challenge was to make these polymer composite orthodontic wires. They look very similar to the teeth color. Unlike metal, you can see it very clearly. So idea is when you smile, you don't want to show your all these wires. So that's why they came up with that idea. But now it became a fashion. So people want actually color. So now they started doing all kinds of colors because they like to display their smile. Yeah, that's how it goes. So, but I'm very proud that many years ago we actually did this work. Okay, so metallic biomaterials, basically they're in a skeletal system, cardiovascular system, and different applications and a kind of materials. You got the whole list there. There are many, many. So I'm not going to list all these materials because just far too many. So far, I talked about 3 different classes of materials, potential applications, their functional behavior, why they change based on their microstructure, and a broad concept of stress shielding. Because you're engineers, that's why I talk about stress shielding. But you are into biology, we have to go deep into the biocompatibility, toxicity, and those kind of studies. So, but since you have engineering background, I'm not talking too much of those things, but they are also necessary. For example, look at this. Is just 2 weeks ago, Singapore hospital, they found a new strain of resistant fungus in our hospitals. Yeah, so it wasn't there before. And so when you are designing biomaterials, and there is something called antimicrobial property. So now when you discover such a new need, you again have to figure out how to modify whatever biomaterials or materials for that particular hospital requirements. So it's like, you remember when new viruses come, new bacteria, new kind of strains, we had to further look at the surface of biomaterial and come up with the newer types. Similarly, here is the case where she's a young person in mid or late 20s. She had a crash and then she lost the memory. Yeah. So again, biomaterials, biomedical devices, the future is you have such this kind of new needs, still not fully solved, and you need a lot of innovations for dealing with this kind of situation. And the more recent, I read it only today in the newspaper, and they're basically talking about the pain. Yeah. So everyone experienced the pain. So you see the right side? Basically, the amygdala is right in the center of your head in the brain. You remember my previous lectures about the brain and mind? That's the emotional processing center. It's supported by hippocampus, thalamus, and this is together, we call it as a limbic system. So when somebody is experiencing pain, apparently the pain signals are going to the amygdala, and then it creates a response. So you have a sense of fear, and your body gets into the action. What happens is when this kind of pain is transmitted through the neurons change, it seems. And then even if there is no pain, they give you the sense you have the pain. So in a chronic pain situation, actually underlying physical basis is no longer there, but your cells are still thinking there is a pain. Yeah. And then to reverse this one, they give you some medicines, painkillers, and so on. But the reality is, we really don't understand the pain. So when you say pain and I say pain, we have a different scale. So it depends. It is painful to you, but not painful to me. It's painful to me, but not painful to you. So how do you figure that out? That's where you need to come up with more innovations. Absolutely. Even though all the medical device innovations are there, a lot more need to be done. And then these biomaterials need to be further improved for antibacterial, antiviral, new functionalities. So there's an endless opportunity to further develop these material systems. That's basically my core point. So whatever I said, whatever you find in the books, it's not conclusive. This is a work in progress subject. So you will always find new and new things. So just keep your mind open, pick the most cutting edge ideas that make sense. Yeah. Okay. So any questions? Yeah. Dissolvable materials necessarily biocompatible. Yes, they have to be. They have to be. Any biomaterial that is interfacing with the biological system has to be biocompatible. Absorbed by bios and motor humors. Biocompatible, even though they're absorbing, they can elicit some reactions, local and systemic. So they cause a lot of secondary problems. So it is a responsibility of the medical device company to prove there is no localized unexpected outcomes and the systemic expect. For example, I fix using a bioresorbable material in the bone, but later on I find I have a pain in the joint, I'm still responsible. That's called a systemic influence. Yeah. Okay, I will stop the recording because online guys unnecessarily had to let me stop.